sentence structure to communicate your ideas clearly, accurately and vividly, to use rhetorical devices to enhance and emphasise the ideas, and to eliminate jargon and unnecessary words, and to use correct grammar in a time of 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, great. So it just leaves me to welcome Toastmaster Holly Blake with a speech entitled A Courageous Man. With a speech entitled A Courageous Man, please welcome Toastmaster Holly Blake.
On the 7th of November 2011, my father, Seamus Blake, sat on his favourite bench on the Strand in Youghal. It was a cold, crisp, clear day, the kind that when you breathe in the air, cold air hits the back of your throat, and when you face the southwest winds, it makes your eyes water. I wasn't there that day myself, so I can only tell you the story from various eyewitness accounts that were taken over the following days. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests, a courageous man. Eyewitness number one was my mother. She'd come down to look after my father, and it had been a kind of ordinary day. He'd rung up his neurologist in Dublin and made an appointment for the following week. It's when they left in the afternoon the day started to go wrong. My dad got to the set of steps to get down to the ground, and for the first time, because his legs were starting to wobble and get jelly-like, he couldn't manage them. My mother had to call a neighbour, and both of them carried him down the stairs and planted him on terra firma at the end, and he was able to shuffle his way to the bench in Youghal. The two of them sat there, my mother says, in a kind of eerie silence. He was annoyed and frustrated and stayed quiet, and she was almost grateful when he asked her if she could go to the shop and get some milk and cookies for the afternoon tea. So off she went. Eyewitness number two was a woman that owned a cafe in Youghal, in the village, who my dad used to go to every Wednesday morning. She passed, she saw him sitting there alone, looking out into the sea, and she said he was crying. But she didn't want to interfere, so she walked on past. Eyewitness number three was a man who my father used to go swimming with. They'd dive off the rocks just by the lighthouse in Youghal and swim out as far as they could and back in again. He passed him, shuffling up the Strand with his head down against the wind, and he never said hello or waved. And the man said that was unusual. My father was a social butterfly, chit-chatted to everybody. But he carried on walking. And as he walked his dog, every so often he glanced up to see my father's figure slowly get smaller and smaller as he headed towards the wooden strand in Ballycotton. When he was just leaving the strand, he looked up one more time, just to see my father slowly manoeuvring himself down the wheelchair axis at the wooden strand up above and make his way onto the sand, and he saw him standing there at the water's edge. He said at that point it was like a brick sank to the bottom of his stomach, and he quickly bent down to put the lead on his dog and tie him up to the lamppost, and when he got up to see my father, he was gone. This was an old man, so with his heart racing, he ran up the strand, but it's a long way, and it took him approximately 4.5 minutes to reach the place that he'd last seen my father. He ran into the shallow waters and only got wet up into his knees and pulled out the body. This man had been in the merchant navy for years and said he'd seen many a drowned man. It's a horrible way to die. The face of a drowned man is twisted and contorted, and this is what surprised him the most. My father lay on the sand, face up, arms akimbo, with the face of peace and a smile of serenity. So let me take you back to the beginning. My father was diagnosed with motor neurons disease in 2010, a degenerative disease, and there is no cure. The life expectancy from the date of diagnosis is 1,000 days. And my father took the prognosis and his gradual disability with both dignity and lots of humour. I used to come home to look after him and just to be with him, and I'd take him down to the beach and tell him and say to him things like, "Okay, hands up, who wants an ice cream?" And he'd give me that sly glance. His arms were totally paralysed at this stage, so I used to buy that hard gel and spike his hair up like this, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. I looked after him, I shaved him, I showered him, I took him to the toilet, I rubbed his skin with oil, and I looked after him like a baby, like he'd looked after me 40 years previously. But on that November afternoon, when he couldn't get down the stairs, he knew what it meant. It meant that he would be either in a wheelchair or confined to a bed and to nappies, as he called them, which absolutely terrified him. And the way the law is in this country, he couldn't ask any family member to help him in that terrible deed and all the trouble that would bring. So on that bright afternoon in November, he made a choice. So this isn't a sad story. If I wanted to tell you a sad story, I would have done a speech about the weather that we've been having this week. This is a story of love, of courage, of bravery, and most of all, of having the wisdom of when to knowing when to bow out gracefully. Thank you.
Which was Project 4, and it was how to say it, and the objectives were to select the right words and sentence structure to communicate your ideas clearly, accurately and vividly, use rhetorical devices to enhance and emphasize ideas, and to eliminate jargon and unnecessary words, and to use correct grammar. Holly. Obviously the objectives of this was the use of words, and I think a lot of Toastmasters use a lot of tricks to disguise or to bluff their way through a speech by using hand gestures or eye movement or whatever else to distract possibly from what might be a weak speech word content-wise. You can just try to razzle-dazzle your way out of trouble. This speech would stand up on radio. There was absolutely no need to do any body language or whatever else. As a radio piece, this would have worked just absolutely perfectly. And that stands to the words that were chosen by yourself for it. It was superb, because you had even examples here, the southwest wind, the eyes in the water, the wobble jelly-like knees, you name it, every word that you used in this speech was descriptive, figurative, and it created an image. Even people who had never been to Youghal had a very clear picture of the surroundings, the wind, the sand, the whole scale of it. It was superbly explained through nothing but words, which was the objective of it, which was superb. You've got, as it said here in the manual, to write for the ear, and that's exactly what you did. You had great use of words like the smile of serenity, the alliteration in that makes you remember smile of serenity, another little phrase that was used as well. You described then like a brick sinking to the bottom of the stomach. Yet again, that is a fantastic phrase as far as I can see for expressing what you meant at the time of the speech. So it was superb. It totally had me wrapped from day one. It got my attention from day one, and I wanted to know where this story was going to head. It was obviously a very personal story to you, and you obviously put a lot of time into getting it. You put a lot of effort into creating this wonderful mental picture or image through words of what happened on that day. And I commend it very much, and very much looking forward to your next speech.
Thank you, Kevin.
We introduce various initiatives. So our initiative